I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway after a 72-hour shift in the backcountry and saw the empty space where my Snowmachine trailer should have been parked. The February cold hit my face as I stepped out of my truck, my muscles aching from 3 days of patrolling the wilderness areas around Fairbanks, Alaska. My name is Frank Yates, and I work as a state ranger for the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. What I didn't expect after dealing with poachers, lost hikers, and a pack of aggressive wolves was coming home to find my personal property missing. I stood there in my driveway, still wearing my ranger uniform, staring at the spot where I'd left my trailer. It was a custom-built enclosed trailer that I used to haul my snow machines for both work and personal use. The thing had cost me nearly $8,000, and now it was just gone. My first thought was theft, naturally. We'd had some break-ins in the neighborhood over the past year, but something about this felt different. Then I saw it. A bright orange sticker plastered on my garage door. I walked over, my boots crunching in the snow, and read the notice. My blood pressure started climbing with every word. The Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association had authorized the removal and impoundment of my trailer for violating community aesthetic standards. They claimed it was an eyesore and that storing commercial vehicles on residential property was prohibited per Section 7.3 of the HOA covenant. I stood there reading this thing 3 times, my jaw clenching harder each time. Commercial vehicle, my personal trailer. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 2 years, and nobody had said a word about my trailer. It sat on the side of my property, barely visible from the street. I kept it maintained, clean, and it wasn't like I had some rusted-out piece of junk sitting there. This was a professional-grade trailer that probably looked better than half the cars in the neighborhood. The notice listed a phone number for the HOA office and mentioned that I had been sent multiple warnings. I pulled out my phone and checked my mailbox, which I hadn't done in 3 days due to being out on patrol. Inside were 2 letters, both dated within the last week. The first was a warning about the trailer. The second was a notice of violation and intent to remove. Both were signed by someone named Brenda Patterson, HOA president. I called the number immediately. It rang 4 times before a woman answered with a voice that already sounded irritated before I'd said a word. Pinewood Heights HOA, this is Brenda speaking. This is Frank Yates from 4425 Evergreen Drive. I just got home and found my trailer has been towed. I need to know where it is and how to get it back. There was a pause and I heard papers shuffling. Mr. Yates, yes. Your trailer was removed 2 days ago due to multiple violations of our community standards. You were sent warnings which you failed to respond to. I was working, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I'm a state ranger. I was out on patrol for 3 days. I couldn't respond to anything because I was in the backcountry without cell service. That's not the HOA's concern, Mr. Yates. The rules apply to everyone regardless of their occupation. Your trailer was classified as a commercial vehicle and was in violation of Section 7.3 of our covenant. You'll need to pay the towing fee and storage fees to retrieve it. The contact information for the impound lot is on the notice. I felt my face getting hot despite the cold. That trailer is not a commercial vehicle. It's my personal property. I use it for recreation. The trailer has commercial-grade specifications and could be used for business purposes. The HOA board made the determination that it violated community standards. If you want to dispute this, you can file an appeal and attend next month's board meeting. Next month, you expect me to leave my $8,000 trailer in impound for a month while you have meetings about whether you had the right to steal my property. Her voice got sharper. "We didn't steal anything, Mr. Yates. We enforced community standards that you agreed to when you purchased your home. The fees are $50 per day for storage, plus the initial towing fee of $350. I suggest you retrieve your trailer soon before the fees become more substantial." I took a deep breath. I'd dealt with difficult people before. Part of my job involved mediating disputes between hunters, fishermen, and various other folks in the backcountry. But this woman was testing my patience in ways that even the most belligerent poacher hadn't managed. "I'll be picking up my trailer today," I said. "But this isn't over. I'll be reviewing your HOA's compliance with state regulations." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Yates?" "No, madam. I'm informing you. Part of my job involves ensuring that organizations operating in Alaska comply with state codes and regulations. Since your HOA seems very concerned with rules and regulations, I'm sure you'll appreciate a thorough review." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, partly from anger and partly from exhaustion. I'd been awake for nearly 20 hours and all I'd wanted was to come home, take a hot shower, and sleep for 12 hours. Instead, I was dealing with this nonsense. I called the impound lot and got the details. They were located about 15 miles outside of Fairbanks, which meant this was going to eat up my entire afternoon. The fees totaled $500 for 2 days of storage and the towing. $500 because some HOA president decided my trailer offended her sensibilities. After changing out of my uniform into civilian clothes, I drove to the impound lot. The place was exactly what you'd expect. A chain-link fence surrounding a muddy lot filled with vehicles in various states of disrepair. I found my trailer sitting in the back corner, looking completely out of place among the actual junkers surrounding it. The guy at the office was at least professional about it. He pulled up the paperwork, took my payment, and processed the release without any drama. As I was hitching the trailer back to my truck, he walked out with the receipt. "For what it's worth," he said, "this is the nicest trailer we've impounded all year. Seems like a waste of everyone's time." "Tell that to my HOA," I muttered. Driving home with my trailer in tow, I couldn't stop thinking about the situation. Something about it felt off. I'd read through the HOA covenant when I bought the house. I was careful about that kind of thing because I knew my work equipment and recreational gear might raise questions. The covenant mentioned restrictions on certain commercial vehicles, but it specifically exempted personal recreational vehicles and equipment. My trailer fell squarely into that category. When I got home, I parked the trailer in the exact same spot where it had been before. Then I went inside and dug out my copy of the HOA covenant. I spent the next hour reading through every section, making notes and cross-referencing with Alaska state codes. What I found was interesting. The HOA was citing Section 7.3, which did mention commercial vehicles. But the full text of that section included an exemption for personal recreational vehicles, which was defined as any vehicle or trailer used primarily for personal outdoor activities, including but not limited to camping, hunting, fishing, and snow machining. My trailer had personal use stenciled right on the side. There was no business name, no commercial licensing, nothing that would indicate it was used for business purposes. But that wasn't the most interesting thing I found. As I read through the covenant more carefully, I started noticing other details. The HOA was supposed to provide 30 days written notice before taking any enforcement action. They'd given me less than a week. The covenant also required that all enforcement actions be voted on by the full board, with at least 3 members present. The notices I'd received were signed only by Brenda Patterson, with no mention of a board vote. I pulled out my laptop and started doing some research. As a state ranger, I had access to various databases and resources. I wanted to know more about this HOA and who was running it. What I found over the next several hours was enlightening. Pinewood Heights HOA had been established 15 years ago when the development was first built. According to the State Business Registry, the HOA had 7 board positions, but only 3 were currently filled: president, treasurer, and secretary. Brenda Patterson held the president position and had for the last 8 years. Her husband, Robert Patterson, was the treasurer. The secretary was a woman named Carol Jenkins. I dug deeper. The HOA's annual financial reports were supposed to be filed with the state and made available to homeowners. The most recent report I could find was from 3 years ago. That was a red flag. HOAs were required to file annually and provide financial transparency to their members. I leaned back in my chair, thinking. I was tired, frustrated, and annoyed, but I was also curious now. Something wasn't right with this HOA, and it went beyond just my trailer being towed. The next morning, after finally getting some sleep, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Pinewood Heights wasn't large, maybe 80 homes total. It was a nice area, well-maintained with decent-sized lots and a mixture of families and retirees. As I walked, I started noticing things I hadn't paid much attention to before. Several houses had RVs or trailers parked beside them. A guy 2 streets over had a boat and trailer sitting in his driveway. Another house had what looked like a commercial landscaping trailer parked on the street. If the HOA was so concerned about trailers and commercial vehicles, why were these being ignored? I knocked on the door of the house with the boat trailer. A man in his 60s answered, introducing himself as Tom Richards. "Quick question," I said. "Has the HOA ever given you any trouble about your boat trailer?" He looked puzzled. "No, why would they? It's my property." "They just towed my Snowmachine trailer, claimed it was a commercial vehicle and violated the covenant." His expression changed to something between surprise and recognition. "You're the ranger who lives on Evergreen, right?" "Yeah, I heard something about that. Brenda's been on a warpath lately. She tried to cite my neighbor for having his work truck in the driveway, said it was commercial. He fought it and she backed down, but it was a whole thing." "What's her deal?" I asked. Tom glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Honestly, I think she just likes the power. She's been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for years. Most people just go along with it because it's not worth the fight, but she picks targets, usually people she doesn't like or people who have crossed her in some way. I've barely interacted with the woman. I don't even go to the HOA meetings." "That might be your crime right there," Tom said. "Brenda doesn't like it when people ignore her. She takes it personally." I thanked him for the information and continued my walk. I stopped at a few more houses, talking to neighbors I'd only waved to in passing before. A pattern started emerging. The HOA, or more specifically Brenda Patterson, had a history of selective enforcement. People who attended meetings and stayed on her good side were left alone. People who didn't, or who questioned her decisions, found themselves dealing with citations, fines, and harassment. One woman, Jennifer Morris, told me that Brenda had tried to fine her for painting her front door teal without HOA approval. The covenant said nothing about door colors. When Jennifer pointed this out, Brenda cited a vague clause about maintaining community aesthetics and threatened to put a lien on her house if she didn't repaint it. Jennifer had eventually given in because she couldn't afford a legal fight. By the time I got back to my house, I had a clearer picture of what was happening. Brenda Patterson was running a corrupt HOA, making up rules as she went along and using her position to bully homeowners into compliance. The question was what to do about it. I spent the rest of the day reviewing Alaska state codes related to HOAs and property management. What most people don't realize is that HOAs in Alaska are subject to significant state oversight, especially when it comes to financial management and governance. They're required to maintain accurate records, file annual reports, provide financial transparency, and follow their own covenants. When they don't, they can face serious consequences. As a state ranger, my primary duties involved natural resources and public lands. But my authority extended to investigating potential violations of state codes and regulations, especially when they related to property use and management. An HOA that was violating state laws and its own covenant was absolutely within my jurisdiction to investigate. I started compiling a formal complaint. I documented the illegal towing of my trailer, the failure to follow proper notice procedures, the selective enforcement of rules, and the missing financial reports. I requested copies of all HOA financial records for the past 5 years, all board meeting minutes, and all enforcement actions taken during that time. The next day, I drove to the HOA office, which was located in a small commercial space near the entrance to the development. The office was only open 3 days a week, and today was one of them. Inside, I found a small reception area with a desk and filing cabinets. Brenda Patterson sat behind the desk, typing on a computer. She looked up when I entered, and her expression immediately soured. "Mr. Yates, what can I do for you?" "I'm here to request copies of HOA records," I said, handing her a formal written request. "As a homeowner, I'm entitled to review financial records, meeting minutes, and enforcement actions." She took the paper and glanced at it, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This will take time to compile. You'll need to submit this in writing and wait for the board to approve the request. Actually, under Alaska Statute 10.20.420, HOA members have the right to inspect corporate books and records during normal business hours. I don't need board approval." "I'm entitled to these records," her face flushed. "I don't have time to pull all of this together right now. You'll have to come back." "That's fine. I can wait. State law says you have 5 business days to produce these records. I'll return on Monday. If the records aren't available, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Alaska Department of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development." I could see her jaw clenching. "Are you threatening me again, Mr. Yates?" "I'm informing you of your legal obligations, Miss Patterson. As someone who's very concerned with rules and regulations, I'm sure you understand the importance of compliance." I left before she could respond. The look on her face had been priceless, but I knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't going to make this easy. Over the weekend, I did more research and made some calls. I contacted the Alaska Department of Commerce to inquire about HOA compliance requirements. I learned that they'd actually been trying to reach Pinewood Heights HOA for over a year about missing financial reports, but had been unable to get a response. When I mentioned I was a homeowner and dealing with compliance issues, they were very interested in hearing more. I also reached out to some of the neighbors I'd spoken with earlier, letting them know what I was doing. Several of them wanted to help. Tom Richards, Jennifer Morris, and a couple of other homeowners who'd been on the receiving end of Brenda's selective enforcement agreed to provide written statements documenting their experiences. On Monday morning, I returned to the HOA office. Brenda was there again, looking even less happy to see me than before. Without a word, she handed me a folder containing about 20 pages of documents. "Here are your records," she said curtly. I opened the folder and immediately saw the problem. These weren't the records I'd requested. This was just basic incorporation documents and a copy of the covenant I already had. Where are the financial records? I asked. The meeting minutes, the enforcement action logs, that's everything we have available. Miss Patterson, I requested 5 years of financial records. Where are they? Those are confidential board materials. No, they're not. They're corporate records that members have a legal right to review. Where are they? Her expression turned hostile. If you don't like how this HOA is run, Mr. Yates, you're free to move. Nobody's forcing you to live here. I'm not going anywhere. But if you don't produce these records by end of business today, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the state. And as a state ranger, I'll also be initiating an official investigation into potential violations of Alaska corporate and property management codes. You can't do that. That's abuse of your position. Actually, investigating potential violations of state law is exactly my position. You've already violated the covenant by illegally towing my trailer without proper notice or board approval. You're now refusing to provide records that you're legally required to provide. I'm well within my authority to investigate this organization. I left the folder on her desk and walked out. As soon as I got to my truck, I called the Department of Commerce and filed a formal complaint. Then I drove to my regional office and initiated an official investigation. My supervisor, a gruff man named Bill Henderson who'd been a ranger for 30 years, listened to my explanation with growing interest. So let me get this straight, he said. Your HOA illegally towed your trailer, and now you've discovered they're violating multiple state codes. That's about the size of it. And you want to use work time to investigate this. It's a legitimate violation of state codes, Bill. This HOA has been operating outside the law for years. They're not filing required reports, they're not following their own covenant, and they're harassing homeowners. He leaned back in his chair, thinking, you know this is going to make you popular with your neighbors and very unpopular with your HOA board. I'm already unpopular with the board. Might as well do something productive with it, he nodded. All right, make it official, but keep me updated and frank. Make sure everything you do is by the book. I don't want this coming back on the department. You know me, Bill, I always follow procedure. Over the next week, I conducted a thorough investigation. I interviewed homeowners, reviewed property records, and dug into the HOA's corporate filings. What I found was worse than I'd expected. The HOA hadn't filed financial reports in 3 years, as I discovered earlier. But it went deeper than that. The HOA collected annual dues of $300 from each of the 80 homeowners, which meant they should have been bringing in $24,000 per year. Over 3 years, that was $72,000, plus whatever reserves they'd had before. I started looking into where that money had gone. The HOA's bank account was registered with a local credit union. With a warrant based on suspected financial impropriety, I was able to get access to the records. What I found was shocking. The account showed regular deposits matching the expected dues collection, but the withdrawals were suspicious. There were regular transfers to an account belonging to Patterson Property Management, a company owned by Brenda and Robert Patterson. The transfers were labeled as management fees, but they totaled over $40,000 in the past 3 years alone. I dug deeper into Patterson Property Management. It was a legitimate business that managed several HOAs in the Fairbanks area. But according to the Pinewood Heights HOA covenant, the board members were volunteers. There was no provision for paid management services, and certainly no authorization for the president to pay herself tens of thousands of dollars from HOA funds. There were other suspicious withdrawals, too. Payments to a landscaping company owned by Robert Patterson's brother. payments to a law firm for services that were never disclosed to homeowners, regular cash withdrawals labeled as petty cash that totaled several $1,000s per year. I compiled all of this into a comprehensive report. Then, I prepared a series of citations for violations of Alaska corporate codes, HOA regulations, and property management standards. The violations included failure to file required reports, misappropriation of corporate funds, self-dealing, failure to maintain proper records, and failure to follow the organization's own governing documents. On Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after my trailer had been towed, I drove to the HOA office in my official capacity as a state ranger. I wore my full uniform, carried my badge, and brought an official state vehicle. I wanted there to be no confusion about what was happening. Brenda was in the office, along with Robert Patterson. They both looked up in surprise when I walked in wearing my uniform. "Mr. Yates," Brenda said, her voice uncertain, "what are you doing here in uniform?" "I'm here in my official capacity as a state ranger with the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association is being cited for multiple violations of Alaska state codes." I handed her a formal citation document. "You're being cited for failure to file required annual reports, misappropriation of corporate funds, self-dealing, inadequate record-keeping, and failure to follow your organization's governing documents." Her face went pale as she read the document. Robert grabbed it from her hands, his own face reddening. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You can't cite an HOA. We're a private organization. You're a corporation registered with the state of Alaska, which means you're subject to state oversight and regulation. These citations require you to cease certain activities, produce documentation, and submit to a financial audit. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties and potential criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" Brenda's voice came out as almost a whisper. "Misappropriation of corporate funds can be prosecuted as theft, Miss Patterson. I've documented over $40,000 in unauthorized payments from HOA funds to your personal business. Unless you can provide documentation showing these payments were properly authorized by the full board and disclosed to homeowners, you're looking at potential felony charges." Robert stepped forward, his face now bright red. "You can't prove anything. We've been managing this HOA for years." Those were legitimate management fees. The HOA covenant makes no provision for paid management. You've been paying yourself from corporate funds without authorization. That's textbook embezzlement. I handed them a second document. "This is a cease and desist order. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from taking any enforcement actions against homeowners, accessing HOA funds, or conducting business on behalf of the association. A state-appointed auditor will be reviewing all financial records. An emergency meeting of all homeowners will be scheduled to address these violations and hold elections for a new board." Brenda was shaking now, tears starting to form in her eyes. "You're doing this because of your trailer. You're abusing your authority." "I'm doing this because you've been stealing from your neighbors for years. The trailer was just how I found out about it. If you'd followed the rules you claim to care so much about, none of this would have happened." I left them there, stunned and silent. As I walked out of the office, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Brenda Patterson had spent years bullying people, making up rules and enriching herself at her neighbor's expense. That ended today. Over the next month, things moved quickly. The state auditor went through the HOA's records and confirmed everything I'd found. The total amount of misappropriated funds was actually higher than my initial investigation had shown, closer to $60,000 over a 5-year period. The Department of Commerce filed criminal charges against Brenda and Robert Patterson for theft and embezzlement. The local district attorney took the case seriously, especially given that it involved stealing from nearly 80 families. An emergency homeowners meeting was held, and it was the most well-attended HOA meeting in the development's history. I presented my findings to the assembled homeowners, showing them exactly where their money had been going. The anger in that room was palpable. People who'd been paying dues for years had no idea their money was being stolen. A new board was elected on the spot. Tom Richards became the new president. Jennifer Morris took the secretary position. The new board's first action was to vote to pursue full restitution from the Pattersons and to reform the HOA's governance structure to prevent future abuse. The criminal case took several months to work through the system. In the end, Brenda and Robert Patterson pleaded guilty to embezzlement charges. They were sentenced to 3 years of probation and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. They were also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Alaska. The Pattersons had to sell their house in Pinewood Heights to pay the restitution. I'd be lying if I said I felt bad about it. They'd stolen from their neighbors and used their position to harass and intimidate people. They deserved what they got. As for me, things returned to normal. My trailer remained parked exactly where it had always been, and the new HOA board had no issues with it. In fact, one of their first actions was to clarify the covenant's language about personal recreational vehicles to prevent future confusion. Tom Richards turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He ran things transparently, held regular meetings, and actually followed the covenant. Dues were reduced since the HOA no longer had to pay inflated management fees to a corrupt board president. The neighborhood started feeling like a real community instead of a dictatorship. I even started attending HOA meetings occasionally, which was something I never thought I'd do. Tom joked that having a state ranger at the meetings kept everyone honest. I told him that was fine, as long as nobody towed my trailer again. One evening about 6 months after the whole situation had resolved, I was working in my garage when Tom stopped by. He had a 6-pack of beer and a big grin on his face. "Figured you might want to hear the latest," he said, handing me a beer. "What's that?" Brenda tried to get a job managing another HOA over in North Pole. They called me for a reference. I couldn't help but laugh. "What did you tell them? The truth?" That she'd embezzled $60,000 from her previous HOA and was convicted of theft. Let's just say they withdrew the job offer. We stood there in the garage, drinking beer and talking about how the neighborhood had changed. It was nice. For the first time since I'd moved to Pinewood Heights, I actually felt like I was part of a community. "You know," Tom said, "a lot of people have asked me how you figured all this out. How you knew to look into the finances and everything." "It wasn't that complicated," I said. "When someone goes out of their way to harass you over something minor, it usually means they're covering up something bigger." Brenda made such a big deal about my trailer that I got curious about why. Once I started looking, the evidence was all there. "Well, on behalf of everyone in this neighborhood, thank you. We all knew something was off, but nobody wanted to be the one to challenge her. You did what needed to be done." After Tom left, I stood in my garage looking at my Snowmachine trailer. It sat there innocently, just a piece of equipment, completely unaware of the chaos it had inadvertently caused. If Brenda had just left it alone, I never would have investigated the HOA. She could have kept stealing from the neighborhood for years, but she couldn't help herself. She had to exert control, had to show her power, had to punish someone who wasn't falling in line with her little fiefdom. And that impulse had been her downfall. I thought about all the people I'd met during this process. Jennifer, who'd been forced to repaint her door. Tom, who'd watched Brenda's behavior for years without being able to stop it. All the other homeowners who'd paid their dues faithfully while their money was being stolen. They all deserved better, and now they had it. My phone rang. It was Bill, my supervisor. "Frank, got a situation up near Denali. Pack of wolves has been getting aggressive with some mushers. Need you to head up there tomorrow morning." "I'll be ready," I said. "And Frank, good work on that HOA thing. You handled it by the book and it paid off." The director mentioned it in our staff meeting. Said it was a good example of how our authority extends beyond just wilderness issues. After we hung up, I smiled. This was what I loved about my job. Yes, most of my work involved natural resources and public lands. But being a ranger meant serving the public in whatever capacity was needed. Whether that was protecting hikers from aggressive wildlife or protecting homeowners from corrupt HOA boards, it was all the same mission, enforcing the law and helping people. I went inside and started packing for my trip to Denali. My trailer would be here when I got back, sitting in my driveway where it belonged. And if anyone had a problem with it, well, they knew where to find me. The next morning, as I was loading gear into my truck, a car pulled up. A woman I didn't recognize got out and walked over to me. She looked nervous. "Are you Frank Yates?" she asked. "That's me." "I'm Sarah Wilson. I live over in the Evergreen Hills development about 10 miles from here. I heard about what you did with your HOA. Word travels fast." My HOA has been doing similar things. Selective enforcement, missing financial records, the board president making decisions without consulting anyone. I've been trying to get answers for months, but I keep hitting walls. I was wondering if you could give me some advice on how to handle it. I looked at her, seeing the frustration and exhaustion in her face. It was the same expression I'd seen on Jennifer's face when she'd told me about being forced to repaint her door. The same look Tom had when he described years of watching Brenda's abuse of power. "First thing," I said, "get a copy of your covenant and read it thoroughly. Then request financial records. They legally have to provide them. If they refuse, that's your first red flag. Document everything, every interaction, every refusal, every inconsistency. Build your case before you make any moves. And then what? Then you decide if you want to fight it yourself or bring in outside help. State agencies can investigate, but it's better if you have a solid case built before you go that route. Talk to your neighbors. Find out if others are experiencing the same issues. There's strength in numbers." She nodded, taking notes on her phone. "Thank you. This really helps, and thank you for what you did. My friend lives in Pinewood Heights and told me the whole story. You saved that neighborhood." After she left, I sat in my truck for a moment before starting the engine. How many other HOAs were out there operating the same way? How many Brendas were using their positions to bully and steal from their neighbors? I couldn't fix them all. But I could fix the one in my neighborhood, and maybe by doing that, I'd inspired others to stand up in theirs. Sarah would go back to Evergreen Hills and start asking questions. Maybe she'd find problems, maybe she wouldn't. But at least she'd be looking. The drive to Denali took several hours, giving me plenty of time to think. The past few months had been a wild ride. All I'd wanted was to come home after a long patrol and find my trailer where I'd left it. Instead, I'd uncovered embezzlement, filed criminal charges, and helped reform an entire HOA. Life was funny that way. You never knew what you'd find when you started pulling on a thread. Brenda thought she was just enforcing HOA rules, exerting her authority over a ranger who wasn't showing her proper respect. She had no idea she was pulling the thread that would unravel her entire operation. I met up with the mushers who'd reported the wolf problem. They were experienced guys who knew how to handle wildlife, but this pack had been unusually aggressive. We spent 3 days tracking the wolves, monitoring their behavior, and eventually relocating the alpha to a more remote area. The rest of the pack followed, problem solved. On my last night before heading home, I sat by a campfire with one of the mushers, a guy named Dave who'd been running dogs for 20 years. "So I heard you had some trouble with your HOA," Dave said, poking at the fire with a stick. I laughed. "Does everyone in Alaska know about that now?" Small state, people talk, especially when it involves someone taking down a corrupt HOA. That's the kind of story that makes the rounds. It wasn't that dramatic. I just enforced the law, maybe. But you also stood up when nobody else would. That counts for something. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the sounds of the wilderness around us. This was what I loved about Alaska. Out here, things were simple, clear. There were rules, natural laws, and they applied to everyone equally. A wolf didn't get special treatment because it was bigger or louder. A tree didn't grow differently because it demanded respect. Maybe that's why Brenda's behavior had bothered me so much. She tried to create her own set of rules, to place herself above the system that was supposed to govern everyone equally. That kind of thinking didn't work in the wilderness, and it shouldn't work in civilized society either. When I finally got home, pulling into my driveway with my trailer in tow, I felt a sense of peace. My house looked the same. My neighborhood looked the same, but everything had changed. The fear and frustration that had hung over Pinewood Heights for years was gone, replaced by something healthier. I parked my trailer in its usual spot and went inside. My mail had piled up during my trip. I sorted through it, finding the usual bills and junk mail. But there was also an envelope from the Pinewood Heights HOA. For a moment, my guard went up. Then I saw it was from Tom. Inside was a simple note. "Frank, the new financial audit came back clean. We've implemented all the oversight measures we discussed. The neighborhood is in good shape. Thank you for everything. Tom." Also in the envelope was a check for $500. The memo line read, "Reimbursement for illegal towing and impound fees." I held the check, smiling. I hadn't asked for reimbursement. I'd been focused on fixing the system, not recovering my losses. But the new board had done the right thing anyway. They'd acknowledged the wrong that had been done and made it right. Over the following months, life settled into a new normal. I continued my work as a ranger, spending days and sometimes weeks in the backcountry. But when I came home, it was to a neighborhood that functioned the way it was supposed to. People took care of their properties because they wanted to, not because they feared arbitrary citations. The HOA handled common areas and legitimate community concerns. It was boring, functional, and exactly what it should be. I ran into Jennifer Morris one day at the local grocery store. She was with her kids, and her front door was still painted teal. "Frank," she called out when she saw me, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. The new board has been amazing. No more harassment, no more made-up rules. It's like living in a completely different neighborhood." "That's good to hear," I said. "How are your kids doing?" "Great. Actually, my oldest is thinking about studying wildlife biology. I told him he should talk to you sometime, get some advice about working for the state." "I'd be happy to," I said, and I meant it. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. Not the big dramatic confrontations or the legal victories, but the small improvements in people's daily lives. Jennifer could paint her door whatever color she wanted. Tom didn't have to deal with a tyrant running his neighborhood. 80 families weren't having their money stolen anymore. One Saturday afternoon, I was washing my truck when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. A young couple got out, looking at the house across the street with a realtor. The realtor saw me and waved. "Hi there. These folks are thinking about buying in the neighborhood. Mind if they ask you a few questions?" "Sure," I said, walking over. The couple introduced themselves as Mark and Lisa Chen. They were moving to Fairbanks for Mark's job and had been looking at different neighborhoods. "How do you like living here?" Lisa asked. "We've heard good things about Pinewood Heights." "It's a great neighborhood," I said honestly. "Good people, well-maintained, reasonable HOA." "What's the HOA like?" Mark asked. "We've heard horror stories about some of them," I smiled. "Actually, we just went through some changes. The old board had some issues, but we've got new leadership now. They're transparent, follow the rules, and actually serve the community instead of ruling over it." The realtor jumped in. "Mr. Yates was actually instrumental in reforming the HOA. There was some financial mismanagement that he helped uncover." "Really?" Lisa looked interested. "What happened?" I gave them the short version, leaving out some of the more dramatic details. They listened with wide eyes. "Wow," Mark said when I finished. "So you really took them down?" "I enforced the law," I said. "They took themselves down by breaking it. They ended up buying the house across the street." A few weeks later, I helped them move some heavy furniture, and we became friends. Mark worked as an engineer, and Lisa was a teacher. They were exactly the kind of people the neighborhood needed: engaged, reasonable, and willing to contribute to the community. The first HOA meeting they attended, Mark came over afterward shaking his head in amazement. "That was the most boring meeting I've ever attended," he said. "That's how they're supposed to be," I replied. "No drama, no fighting, just people discussing maintenance schedules and snow removal." It was beautiful. Fall arrived, then winter again. A year had passed since Brenda had towed my trailer. My snow machines got plenty of use that winter, and I loaded them on and off my trailer dozens of times without anyone saying a word. Because why would they? It was my property, used for recreation, and bothered nobody. I thought about Brenda sometimes, wondering how she was doing. I'd heard through the grapevine that she and Robert had moved to a different part of Alaska, trying to start fresh. Part of me felt bad about how everything had turned out for them. But mostly, I felt satisfied that justice had been served. They'd had a choice. When I first confronted Brenda about the records, she could have been honest. She could have admitted there were problems and worked to fix them. Instead, she doubled down, refused to cooperate, and forced the situation to escalate. Every step of the way, she'd chosen the path that led to her downfall. Tom turned out to be a natural leader. Under his guidance, the HOA implemented new bylaws that required financial transparency, term limits for board members, and regular audits. He established a neighborhood newsletter that kept everyone informed about HOA activities. He even organized community events, summer barbecues, winter festivals, a neighborhood watch program. Pinewood Heights became the kind of place people wanted to live, not just a collection of houses bound by restrictive covenants. Property values increased. People took pride in their homes and their community. And it all started because someone towed my trailer. One evening in early spring, about 14 months after the whole situation had begun, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Tom walked over. "Got something for you," he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a plaque. It read, "Presented to Frank Yates in recognition of outstanding service to the Pinewood Heights community. Your courage and integrity helped restore trust and accountability to our neighborhood. Thank you." The board voted unanimously to give you this, Tom said. We wanted you to know how much what you did meant to everyone here. I was genuinely touched. You didn't have to do this. Yes, we did. You could have just paid the impound fees, moved your trailer somewhere else, and let Brenda keep doing what she was doing. Instead, you stood up. You fought back. And you did it the right way, through legal channels with evidence and proper procedure. You showed everyone that the system works when good people are willing to use it. We sat on the porch together, talking about the neighborhood and how far it had come. Tom told me about future plans, repairing the entrance sign, updating the playground equipment, maybe even building a community garden. You should run for the board, he said. We've got an opening and you'd be perfect for it. I shook my head. I appreciate the offer, but I'm gone too much for work. You need someone who's around consistently. Besides, you're doing a great job. The neighborhood doesn't need me on the board. Maybe not need, Tom said, but the offer stands if you ever change your mind. After he left, I sat alone on my porch, holding the plaque. My trailer sat in the driveway, looking the same as it had 15 months ago when this whole thing started. But everything else had changed. I thought about all the people I'd encountered during this journey. The neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak up. The state officials who'd been trying to enforce compliance but lacked the insider information they needed. The new homeowners like Mark and Lisa, who would now enjoy a well-run, honest HOA without ever knowing how bad things had been. And I thought about Brenda. Despite everything, I didn't hate her. I actually pitied her. She'd had a position of trust and authority, and she'd squandered it for relatively small amounts of money and petty power. She'd made herself and her husband into criminals, destroyed their reputation, and forced them to leave their home. All because she couldn't resist the temptation to abuse her position. My phone buzzed with a text from Bill. Need you to check on a reported illegal hunting camp near Delta Junction. Can you head out Monday? I texted back. I'll be there. This was my life. Patrolling the wilderness, enforcing laws, protecting resources, and occasionally taking down corrupt HOA boards. It wasn't what I'd expected when I took the job as a state ranger, but it was satisfying in ways I'd never anticipated. Monday morning came, and I hitched my trailer to my truck, loaded my gear, and prepared for another patrol. As I was doing final checks, Mark walked over with a cup of coffee. Heading out? He asked. Yeah, got a situation up near Delta Junction. Should be back in a few days. Hey, Lisa and I wanted to invite you over for dinner when you get back. We're having some friends over and we'd love for you to join us. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. As I drove out of the neighborhood, I looked in my rearview mirror at Pinewood Heights. The morning sun was hitting the houses just right, making everything look warm and welcoming. My home. My community. A place that had been broken and was now healed, stronger for having gone through the fire. I thought about Sarah Wilson from Evergreen Hills, the woman who'd asked me for advice. I wondered if she'd found the same problems in her HOA that I'd found in mine. I wondered if she'd had the courage to do something about it. I hoped she had, because standing up to corruption and abuse of power was never easy, but it was always worth it. The highway stretched out before me, leading to new challenges and new situations. Somewhere near Delta Junction, someone was illegally hunting, breaking laws, and threatening the wildlife I was sworn to protect. I'd find them, document their violations, and hold them accountable, just like I'd done with Brenda Patterson. Because that's what the law was. A promise that everyone would be held to the same standards, that power wouldn't exempt you from accountability, and that justice was available to anyone willing to fight for it. Whether you were dealing with poachers in the wilderness or corrupt HOA boards in suburban neighborhoods, the principle was the same. My trailer rolled smoothly behind me, carrying equipment I'd need for the days ahead. It was just a trailer, a piece of equipment, a tool for my job and recreation. But it had become something more, a symbol of the fight against arbitrary authority, of standing up for what was right, of refusing to be bullied into silence. Brenda Patterson had thought she could intimidate me by towing it. She'd thought I'd pay the fees, move the trailer, and meekly accept her authority. She'd been wrong, and that mistake had cost her everything. As I drove north toward Delta Junction, I found myself smiling. Life as a state ranger was never boring. You never knew what you'd encounter when you woke up in the morning. One day you're tracking wolves, the next you're taking down a corrupt HOA. It kept things interesting. And somewhere behind me, in a quiet neighborhood in Fairbanks, 80 families were going about their lives in a community that worked the way it was supposed to. They'd pay their dues knowing the money was being spent appropriately. They'd follow reasonable rules that were enforced fairly. They'd serve on the board if they wanted to, or stay uninvolved if they preferred, without fear of retaliation. That was worth more than any plaque or recognition. That was the real victory, not the dramatic confrontation or the legal consequences, but the quiet, lasting improvement in people's daily lives. The knowledge that standing up had made a difference, that refusing to accept injustice had created real change. The radio crackled with a weather update. Snow was expected later in the week. Good tracking weather for finding that illegal hunting camp. I settled in for the long drive, my mind already shifting to the task ahead. But part of me would always remember the day I came home to find my trailer gone, and discovered that sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in the wilderness, but in your own backyard. And sometimes, the people who need protecting aren't lost hikers or threatened wildlife, but your own neighbors who have forgotten they have the power to demand accountability from those who claim authority over them. That was a lesson worth learning, worth sharing, and worth fighting for. My trailer rolled on behind me, no longer just a piece of equipment, but a reminder that justice delayed might be justice denied. But justice pursued with patience, evidence, and proper procedure was justice that lasted. Brenda Patterson had learned that lesson the hard way. And Pinewood Heights was better for it.